Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore. I didn't plan on speaking about this again. Not because I signed anything, though I did, but because it changed the way I understand what it means to sleep, what it means to dream. There are names I won't mention, departments I won't dignify, and a chain of decisions I still don't fully understand. But the pattern was real. And it started quietly. As most patterns do. The first report came from a clinic in Buenos Aires. A low-volume sleep study, part of a trial on REM suppression drugs. Nothing remarkable until two subjects, randomly selected, no prior interaction, both described a flat plain with 4 identical stone ridges and a pale sky that never darkened. The descriptions were precise down to the angle of incline. Neither patient had traveled outside the city. One was nearly blind. The data was archived, flagged as a possible interview leak, and forgotten. 6 days later, a separate facility in Helsinki flagged their internal review software. 3 patients, unrelated in age, background, or health condition, described a location with striking overlap. Narrow stone towers, a dry wind that never stopped, and an overwhelming sense of arrival, like they had come back to somewhere they hadn't known they'd left. They used that phrase exactly. All 3. A week after that, a postdoctoral researcher at a university in Japan submitted a request for protocol revision. Her note said she was seeing repeat environments in her lucid dream volunteers. The phrase was clinical, but her tone wasn't. She asked if there had been any published cross-lab pattern reports recently. No one replied. By the time the third report reached our office, it had already been diluted through 4 layers of admin review. Someone above me had highlighted a sentence in orange and written a note in the margin. Dream content redundancy. Possible cultural artifact? Cultural artifact. That was the first official word used to describe it. As if these people, all speaking different languages, scattered across thousands of miles, had been watching the same commercial on repeat. At first, we treated it as contamination. The standard explanation. A leaked audio prompt, maybe. A lazy in-turn recycling test phrases. Dreams are slippery, easy to skew, easier to misinterpret. But these weren't narratives. They were spaces, landscape, consistent in dimension, terrain, atmosphere. Not just similar, identical. The patients didn't know one another. Most of them were heavily medicated. Some barely remembered their own names. Yet they all described the same slope of stone, the same unnatural light, and something just outside the frame of their vision they couldn't or wouldn't describe. I remember sitting alone in my office, reading over those transcripts for the 5th time. I looked at the timestamp. I looked at the language translations. I ran word frequency analyses, mapped the phonetic structure. I even ran an old pattern recognition model we'd shelved after funding cut. It lit up like it had found a fingerprint. There was no way to account for that convergence. Not with any of the frameworks we had. So I did what any careful academic would do. I waited. I assumed someone else would take it seriously, or disprove it altogether. It's easier to let anomalies burn out on their own than chase them down. But it didn't burn out. It spread. Quietly, predictably, relentlessly. There was a man in Marseille, an older woman in Pretoria, a child in Vancouver. Different continents, same place, same place. That phrase again. When I finally accepted that what I was looking at wasn't random, I made a call I shouldn't have. To someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. The moment I said the phrase, she went silent. Then she said, "You're the 3rd call this week." That was when I knew. The dream wasn't theirs. It never had been. I remember the sketches first. Paper, charcoal, trembling hands. Some done under duress. Some methodical, as if guided. No faces. No people. Just terrain, repeating, precise, unplaceable. There was a shape they kept returning to. A plane that never curved with the earth. Circular markers, always 5, spaced unevenly but never overlapping. One at the edge of a ridge. Two aligned against what looked like a trench. Another sunk into the flat stone. The last, always drawn in isolation, described as close but unreachable. No one knew what it meant. They would draw it without looking at their hands, like it had to come through uninterrupted. The descriptions didn't vary. Translations from Spanish, Finnish, Japanese. Different phrasing, identical meanings. A slope described as light moving through crushed glass. Others said it was frozen thunder. That phrase kept coming back. Not poetic. Not metaphor. That's how they experienced it. We placed EEG caps on subjects in their second week. Standard equipment, nothing fancy. The spikes weren't what concerned me, it was the timing. All subjects showed synchronized REM bursts within the same 27-second window. Different time zones, different sessions, no shared stimuli. It kept happening. We scrambled the schedules, changed the environment, altered their intake protocols. It made no difference. I showed the sketches to a geometry analyst we'd used in a prior study. Quiet man, no interest in dream theory. He laid them out on the floor and stared for almost 20 minutes before speaking. His first question wasn't about the dreamers. He asked if the drawings had been based on an object. A map, maybe. A terrain model. I told him no. They came from people who'd never met, who couldn't agree on the day of the week, who sometimes woke up screaming and didn't remember drawing anything at all. He didn't answer. Just rotated the papers. Said he recognized the angles. Non-Euclidean, he muttered, but bounded. There was a rule inside the irregularity. A kind of constraint. Something shaped those forms. He pointed at two curves, disconnected on the page but mirrored in angle, and said they shouldn't align. But they did. Across drawings from 4 continents, we ran the outlines through image analysis. The system flagged 5 consistent angular forms. Some matched ancient structures, Mesoamerican, Anatolian, but with distortions that couldn't be accounted for by erosion or perspective. One sketch in particular drew attention. Not for what was visible, but for what was missing. A blank region in the lower quadrant. Every subject who drew it left that space untouched. Not erased. Ignored. When asked, each one said the same thing. I'm not supposed to look there. No one coached them. We verified the transcripts. No anomalies in voice inflection or suggestion. Just an unshakable certainty that part of the space in their mind's eye was off limits. The analyst requested to step away from the project after that. I didn't ask why. I already knew. Something was anchoring those forms. Across culture, language, brain chemistry. It wasn't imagination. It was recall. And what terrified me most wasn't that they all dreamed the same geometry. It was that it seemed to be waiting. They never said the word reinstated. The call didn't need formality. Just coordinates, a code I still remembered, and a one-line message. You've been cited in a pattern convergence. That was enough. When I arrived, the building looked the same. Aging, silent, overfunded in places that didn't matter. The ones who greeted me were younger, sharper, but their eyes carried that same weight I'd seen before. The weight of people who were piecing together something too precise to ignore but too large to name. They were calling it Project Somnus, a provisional title, until someone came up with something less direct. They didn't. The name stayed. The room they brought me to wasn't impressive. 6 terminals, redacted dossiers, a projection screen with 6 repeating images. Dream sketches layered atop each other, almost transparent but never misaligned. I was shown raw audio first. Interview fragments from subjects across Europe, North America, East Asia. Phrases I'd already heard, but now stacked in chorus. A slope without gravity. Light that didn't move. Shapes that didn't cast shadow unless you watched them. The rhythm of it was unbearable. No silence between clips. Just one mind echoing through many mouths. Then they showed me the geometry logs. Hundreds of scans layered and processed. An analyst had run a comparison model across non-terrestrial topographies. Craters. Ancient formations. Lunar rock structures. They weren't looking for perfect matches. They were looking for intention. Something built, or something observed that repeated enough to carry form. What changed everything came from an algorithm they hadn't even meant to use. It belonged to an NSA archive protocol written for Cold War-era satellite imaging, trained to identify false positives caused by magnetic interference in high-altitude data sweep. The software had been retired for decades. Someone in the project thought to run the dream-shape composite through its matching protocol. No one expected it to return anything meaningful. It did. A satellite frame from October 1981. Logged during a Soviet reconnaissance sweep. The image was archived in a corrupted block, misfiled, and dismissed at the time as exposure damage caused by solar radiation. But once cleaned and processed, the overlay was unmistakable. The geometry matched. Not suggested. Not approximated. Matched. Down to the offset curvature. The staggered spacing. The fractured alignment in the lower sector that every subject refused to sketch. There it was, in grainy, high-altitude imagery taken 43 years ago, by a satellite whose name had been erased from most records. The frame had been marked as noise. Repeated in the log, anomaly due to signal drift. No follow-up ever logged. No second pass requested. I sat with that image for a long time. Not because I doubted it, but because I didn't know what to do with it. A location that didn't exist on any map, visible once, in a feed no human had viewed until a machine misclassified it. What haunted me wasn't that it was found. It was that someone had seen it before. They had built the tool that recognized the shape. Before any dreamer described it. Before we ever called it geometry. We weren't decoding a mystery. We were retracing the edge of something already charted, quietly buried, and long since abandoned. The satellite frame had no latitude or longitude. Just a coordinate block so degraded it took 4 different reconstruction engines to render anything legible. What came through looked like a shallow basin, lined with ridges that didn't follow geological logic. Too even to be natural. Too broken to be engineered. Each elevation line curved toward a center point, then stopped, like something had interrupted their formation halfway through. We fed the coordinates through every official mapping archive. Nothing. The area was a blind spot. Not blank, not censored. Absent. Soviet cartographic archives referred to the sector only in footnotes, with phrasing designed to end inquiry. Temporary surveillance exclusion zone. Atmospheric distortion perimeter. Instrumental inconsistency region. Each term carefully chosen to sound technical, final, and meaningless. No flyovers had been recorded since 1983. The last known aerial survey rerouted 40 miles short of the basin's edge. Weather balloons failed on entry. Recon planes lost signal. Nothing returned images from inside the boundary. We requested satellite time from independent providers. Several declined. One agreed, under condition of silence. The first scan arrived 2 days later. It showed no structures. Just terrain. Dry. Featureless. But when processed through the same filter we'd used for the dream overlays, the markers appeared. Faint, buried, but there. 5 depressions in a rough arc. 1 offset. 1 alone. The same configuration drawn by patients in 12 countries. The same pattern etched into the grain of a corrupted feed from a satellite no one remembered launching. The analyst found one more detail buried in the metadata. A set of partial transmission logs from the original 1981 frame. Not part of the image. Audio diagnostics. 8 seconds of static interrupted by a sequence of pulses. Non-rhythmic. Not language. Not signal drift. We ran it through audio pattern analysis. The output resembled nothing known. No instrument signature. No environmental match. Just a compression of high-frequency impulses mapped against nothing. The closest thing it resembled wasn't sound. It was brain activity. A cluster identical to a pre-REM surge. Not from a machine. From a person. As if the satellite had recorded not a transmission, but a trace. A reflection. The Soviets must have known. Not what it was, but what it did. How it persisted. How it echoed. Scrubbing the records wasn't about secrecy. It was about containment. They didn't hide a location. They removed a mirror. Every map since had inherited that blind spot. Every satellite followed the same flight path. Every agency repeated the same bureaucratic phrasing. No one had seen it. Not in decades. Not awake. But thousands had been dreaming of it. Without knowing, they were remembering a place real enough to lose signal. Real enough to be erased from the surface of the earth without moving a single stone. We had the coordinates. We had the satellite trail. We had every reason not to go. But one by one, those reasons stopped mattering. The dreams weren't stopping. They were getting closer. The directive was clear. Strip the input. Remove the variables. Eliminate exposure. We built the control group across 4 continents. No shared media. No open networks. Subjects screened for neurological abnormalities, cultural crossover, trauma imprinting. Isolated, monitored, contained. Standard control protocol, but airtight this time. The goal was simple: prove contamination. Media, suggestion, subliminal transfer, anything. Something we could name. The first reports came back in 9 days. Quiet, routine logs. But the phrasing had shifted. A woman in Argentina described a place with no wind, no sound, and 5 standing shapes she said were not buildings and not stones. She had never been shown a sketch, never been prompted with visuals. She wrote those words herself. 5 standing shapes. Not buildings. Not stones. Another report from Norway. Male, mid-30s, post-trauma recovery. No prior dream recollection across 3 months of observation. On the 10th night, he woke up screaming. Not from fear. From confusion. He said the silence was wrong. That's all. Just wrong. A researcher in Korea flagged a drawing from a subject who had not spoken since childhood. A nonverbal autistic adult. No history of illustrative behavior. During a routine check, he had taken a crayon and sketched 5 perfect circles, unevenly spaced. The angle mirrored the satellite overlay from 1981. No deviation. He had not been exposed to the images. The room was cleared daily. The data secure. We checked the logs twice. 3 more cases emerged within 48 hours. All reporting elements we had not publicly archived. The slope of light. The fractured horizon. A shape on the edge of perception that none of them could explain but all of them mentioned. One used the phrase, "It was there, but I wasn't allowed to face it." None of them had contact with the core study. None had access. None had reason to lie. We interviewed each one under controlled conditions. No cues. No suggestion. Every time we stripped the question down, the answer stayed intact. There was a place. They had been to it. They had not traveled. They had not imagined it. The question changed. Not where. Not how. The only question left was why them. We reviewed neurological scans from control subjects. One case stood out. Subtle, easily missed. A spiking pattern during stage 3 sleep. High-frequency bursts in the hippocampus. Repeating once every hour for exactly 4 nights. Not pathological. Not epileptic. Patterned. Predictive. The same burst length observed in the original dreamers. The conclusion was unacceptable. So it was buried under further tests. Further scans. New controls. It didn't matter. It spread. We pulled back. Redrew the terms. Tried to frame it again in familiar language. Suggestion. Contagion. Mimetic infection. Nothing held. This was not transmission. It was reception. The landscape wasn't being imagined. It was arriving. Quietly. Uninvited. Unannounced. It was not waiting to be found. It was reaching. Not for attention. Not for response. For recognition. The decision was already made when they told me. The team was in transit. Satellite blackout requested. Entry point established through an old mineral rights corridor no longer claimed by either government. There was no briefing. Just a map with 3 circles and a handwritten time stamp. The coordinates traced the edge of the depression, the same one buried in the corrupted frame. I asked how long they'd stay. No one answered. The first message came through 12 hours later. Short clip. Terrain consistent with imaging. Windless. No obvious life. But there was noise on the recording, something beneath the static. A rhythm that didn't match the engine hum or the mic shift. It was faint, but wrong. One of the techs tried to clean the audio. She isolated the tone. Said it wasn't mechanical. Said it was closer to breath. They reached the basin at dawn. The light changed before they crossed the threshold. The logs show the timestamp, but the shadows didn't match it. The angle reversed, as if the source of light had moved behind them, despite the sky showing no shift. Every photograph came back warped. Not corrupted. Stretched, as if perspective itself had been misread. The geologist noted magnetic deviation across all instruments. Compasses spun, stabilized, spun again. Radios dropped range. The satellite uplink collapsed completely. They used a shortwave fallback, but even those signals came scrambled. Transcripts recorded speech patterns breaking down, syntax errors, hesitation mid-sentence, unrelated words replacing key terms. Not fatigue. Not stress. Just failure of articulation. Their botanist found growth along the edge of the depression. Pale, rigid. Leaves that cracked instead of bending. No root system. No known genus. The samples degraded before testing. Each one turned black within minutes of isolation. Not decomposition. Just absence. The medic reported no injuries, but he kept referencing one subject without context. No name. Just phrases like he's adjusting differently and he doesn't seem to register distance. No follow-up. No clarification. 4 hours into their descent, the first request for exfil came through. Not from the leader. From the communications officer. It wasn't phrased as a command. Just a quiet request for removal. They weren't under attack. No environmental threat. Nothing immediate. They just wanted out. One was missing. No transmission announced it. The first mention was passive. Last seen near the ridge. Not responding. Not resisting. Just not there. 2 members went looking. Found footprints in the dust, uniform spacing, deeper on the left side. As if the body was being pulled by one hip forward, step after step, without course correction. They followed the trail to the inner ring of the depression. There was no body. No impact site. Just 5 standing stones. Identical in size. As in the dreams. They called out. He walked into frame from the opposite side. No response to their voices. No recognition. One arm lifted slightly forward, like measuring something just out of reach. When they moved closer, he spoke one phrase. It's still moving. That's all. They pulled him back. No resistance. But he didn't sleep again. Every attempt resulted in REM onset within seconds. He would sweat without temperature. Speak in fractured sentences. Begin laughing mid-sentence and stop without transition. He didn't eat. He didn't blink unless prompted. He was gone without leaving. Extraction was approved 3 hours later. The team boarded without gear. They left their instruments. No one objected. When the footage arrived, most of it was unusable. Some was untouched. One image stood out. A still frame caught by accident. A shape in the background, obscured by atmosphere distortion. Too large to measure. Not a building. Not a rock. No motion. No blur. It looked like a person kneeling. But when we enhanced it, the scale broke down. It wasn't kneeling. The land was. They came back quieter. Not shaken, not disturbed. Just absent in a way that made conversation feel like trespass. The debriefs were short. Phrases clipped mid-thought. No one argued. No one requested clarification. Every answer felt like the end of a longer sentence spoken somewhere else. Medical scans showed no damage. No infection. No measurable trauma. But their sleep changed. Within 3 nights, all 5 began recording identical neural surges at precise intervals. REM onset occurred faster. Duration extended. Patterns sharpened. They weren't dreaming more often. They were dreaming deeper, as if whatever they had seen had cut a direct path through memory and found a permanent place to grow. Each night they began in the depression, not close to it, inside it. The same 5 markers present. The same slope of light. But the path no longer ended there. The dreams continued below. None of them remembered going underground. But all woke with impressions of space, weight, and an enclosure that did not obey their sense of movement. Some described stairs that narrowed instead of descending. Others heard sounds resembling breath, but with no rhythm. One described a door made of nothing but pressure. They weren't frightened. That's what unsettled us most. Their effect remained level. Heart rate steady. No signs of stress. It was as if the dreams required a calm state to function, and the body had adjusted. Until one stopped waking. No prior symptoms. No physical distress. No sign of asphyxiation. The monitors recorded REM activity intensifying 20 minutes before his heart stopped. The spikes grew sharper. Then flattened. But brain activity didn't stop. It climbed. For 13 minutes after death, the frontal lobe continued firing. Not decaying. Structuring. As if a task had not yet completed. As if death had not interrupted it, only released it from interruption. We secured his logs. Hundreds of pages. Most incoherent. But buried near the end, one sequence repeated every 3rd entry. A series of numbers and angles, always paired with 3 words: stairs, water, boundary. None of these had appeared in previous dream logs. All of them matched subterranean mapping data pulled from Cold War survey missions never published. One location intersected with our depression site. The surveyors noted an underground anomaly. Their final report concluded the formation was inaccessible. No reason given. The remaining team members began to deteriorate. Not mentally, spatially. They had difficulty standing still. Couldn't align with objects around them. One kept turning to face corners that didn't exist. Another traced invisible arcs in the air with his finger, saying nothing, recording nothing. Just repeating the motion as if measuring something beyond the room. The logs continued. Each more specific than the last. Doorways not marked by material but by sensation. Rooms not bound by walls but by return point. One wrote that she stood on a platform inside a structure that changed shape based on her intention, but refused to open unless she forgot where she was. They weren't dreaming. They were inside something. Each night they returned to the same space. Each night it expanded. Not physically. Conceptually. As if the landscape beneath the depression wasn't built but grown from memory, one fragment at a time, drawn from every mind that entered it. But shaped only when no one was watching. The last surviving team member stopped speaking. Not out of refusal. Out of inability. His words dissolved before reaching air. He began writing again. Always the same message. Not a warning. Not a confession. You're not supposed to bring it back. He never said what it was. None of them did. They only agreed on one thing. The dreams no longer belonged to them. They were visitors, guests, and the door had stopped letting them leave. It didn't stay inside the project. We had tried to believe it was bounded, contained by the data, the location, the minds it had touched. But the boundary never existed. It was an illusion of delay. We weren't early observers. We were already late. Reports began surfacing outside the network. Unaffiliated clinics logging identical dream element. Unsolicited emails from sleep researchers asking about recurring geometric anomalies in their control populations. No one had shared anything, yet the details matched down to phrasing. Children described the slope again. Always the same light. Always the same phrase. Frozen thunder. One child drew the ridge in chalk across her bedroom wall before speaking a word that hadn't been in her vocabulary. Incline. She said the incline was breathing. Emergency rooms recorded night terrors in patients with no prior psychiatric history. Several described pressure behind their eyes, as if they had looked at something they couldn't unsee but didn't remember seeing. One described a noise like thinking in someone else's voice. She couldn't say whose. The overlap wasn't symbolic. It was mathematical, time, structured. Data analysts found a rhythm in the timestamps, intervals repeating across geographic divides, unlinked by any known transmission. We weren't dealing with a signal. We were tracing the impact of something that had never left the source because the source wasn't in time. One of the physicists proposed a hypothesis without a name. She refused to publish it. Her premise was this: the satellite didn't capture a location. It recorded a reverberation. Not light, not radiation, not topography. A moment burned backward from the future through the dream state, branded into the sensor array before the dreamers were even born. The feed wasn't corrupted. It was overwhelmed. What it captured wasn't broken data. It was the residue of minds arriving at a shared destination decades too early. A place that hadn't yet formed, but was already waiting to be remembered. No one could explain how memory could precede experience. No model held up. Every attempt to simulate the pattern failed. Machines couldn't replicate what the brain could receive effortlessly in sleep. The dreams were not fiction. They were convergence. That's when the shutdown order came. Project Somnus was over. Not publicly. Not officially. Just gone. We were told to delete records, wipe logs, cease communication with all field contact. Some complied. Some didn't. The site was sealed. The team dispersed. No explanations. No statements. They didn't need to silence us. No one wanted to speak about it anymore. What would we say? That a place no one had visited was forming inside the heads of strangers? That a satellite designed to map terrain had accidentally recorded the weight of a future thought? That a child born 4 decades after the signal was logged could dream the exact shape of something no map could find? It stopped being a question of location. It became a question of sequence. The resonance wasn't a message. It was a return pulse. Something heard us thinking, and we had no way of knowing which of us had thought it first. They erased the project, but not what it left behind. The silence wasn't clean. It had edges. You could still hear something behind it if you listened the wrong way. I was relocated. Reassigned, they said. Then monitored. The visits stopped after the 3rd week. I was left with a blank schedule, a quiet apartment, and a sleep pattern that no longer belonged to me. I started logging my own dreams. Not out of curiosity. Out of necessity. I knew the signs. The slope appeared again. The 5 markers returned. But something new had taken hold. Each dream no longer began at the edge. I was waking inside it. Past the threshold. Past the light. The landscapes shifted nightly, but they carried structure. Not symbolic. Not subconscious. Structured. I began sketching them by hand. Comparing them frame by frame. I saw returns. Landmarks. Points of reference that weren't visually consistent, but were mathematically tethered. You couldn't recognize them by shape, only by orientation. I compared my sketches with archived logs from earlier dreamers, the ones we weren't supposed to keep. I hadn't deleted them. I never intended to. Layered together, the fragments aligned in strange ways. Misaligned drawings, stretched perspectives, partial phrases, each a puzzle piece that meant nothing until forced to overlap. I built a composite. Crude. Incomplete. But enough. It wasn't a map in the traditional sense. There were no borders. No directional cues. But there were curves. Recurring intersections. Recursion points. Each dreamer had offered a different layer. Not of space, but of motion. They weren't drawing places. They were recording turns. Choices. Movements. Trajectories through something that changed based on who was dreaming it. It wasn't cartography of terrain. It was cartography of orientation. A log of how thought moved through a shape that did not exist outside the dreaming mind. But the shape was growing. Each time a new dream appeared, it added to the structure. Not at random, deliberately, as if something was charting a path backwards, using each of us as a temporary host to mark a step. We were never meant to see the whole. Only fragments, enough to keep the motion going. That motion was directional, and the direction was toward the depression. I stopped resisting. The dreams became a language I no longer translated. I experienced them directly, without confusion. There were no symbols, no archetype, just progress, a kind of unfolding. No message, no voice, just the knowledge that the thing being built was not complete, and it needed me to take the next step. Not to finish it, just to witness the next section so it could continue building. I was no longer being shown. I was being used. I packed lightly. I took no recordings, no tracking equipment, just the map, stitched from fragments, inked on translucent sheets, worn from handling. It's not accurate in the way maps are expected to be. It won't lead anyone to a place, because it's not a place. It's a process, and I know where to go next. The path has already been laid. The step has already been marked. I just have to follow it. I'll reach the depression before nightfall. I don't expect to return, but I do expect to remember. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end. Now, if you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, do subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.